Hey everyone, welcome to Shepherd Lutheran Church. I know it's been a few weeks since I've been here, so it's good to be back. But as always, I'm so glad you could be with us today as we read some scripture and reflect on it. Actually, for the next few weeks during Advent, I am going to be reading the psalm from the previous Sunday and then sharing some comments about it since I normally don't preach on the Psalms. Um, during during the Advent season itself. So I'm going to use some time the next few weeks to reflect on that. And today, the reading comes to us from Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, O Lord, should mark it any iniquities, Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that you may be revered. I wait for my soul. I wait for my Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than those watching for the morning, more than those watching for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is great power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel from all its iniquities. This ends our reading. See, it's interesting because there is a lot that is going on here in this psalm, even though we just hear just a few verses of it today. But in Psalm 130, the writer is calling out to God from the depths of human suffering, hoping for and expecting that, and insisting on God's hearing their cries for help. The psalmist has every confidence that God will hear and respond to every cry and pain, because mercy, the writer insists, is who God is. The lament in Psalm 130 is familiar to our hearing living. So the psalmist cries out to God from what we are told are, it's translated in NRSV as the depths, from the darkest abyss of human suffering. That abyss takes different shapes for each person individually and each community of it. And it's usually not when we're expecting it. So grief, depression, illness, poverty, abuse, any of these kinds of experiences and so many more can plunge us into the darkness of this pit that is so deep that it can almost feel like death. That this and this is reflected centrally in the Psalms, and it's repeated over and over and over again. And even Augustine, in his reflection on this, in the abyss to the belly of the whale in which Jonah was trapped. Jonah's abyss was deep in the water, in the yawning center of this whale's body, tangled in the very entrails of the beast. In verse 1 and 2 is there's a demand to be heard, an insistence that God listen to the torment. Pay attention to my suffering, for heaven's sake. Have mercy on me. Often such a statement issues a sense of God's absence in our death. Whether it's our pain is physical or psychological or spiritual or any combination of that, it can be so isolating that we feel abandoned to our misery, even by God. And I know this from my own personal journey. It's amazing what we can convince ourselves of when we are in a pit of whatever. So the careful structure of the way that Psalm 130 is written, it indicates that the demand here issues not from a sense of abandonment, but a sense of uncertainty. Feeling as if we're not certain that God will hear us, even though this writer is telling us that we should know that. writer cries out with this sure conviction that God cares. Verse 5 states that the psalmist trusts in the promises that God has made and waits for the fulfillment. And then twice in verse 6, the psalmist describes his or her soul as waiting for the Lord's more than those who watch in the morning. That phrase may refer to those who, after a night of prayer, receive confirmation of God's redemption with a new light of salvation. And the psalmist is asserting that he or she lives with even a greater certainty of God's attention than these. Now, again, this could be some person who's boasting that is some holier or that eager to show up everybody else in the faithlessness department. Uh, but actually, this text can also be a careful statement about God's character, not the psalmist's. And the key to understanding this might be in verse 3 and 4, where it says, "If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, who can stand? Be there, but there is forgiveness with you, so that you may be revered." The psalmist is not asserting the power of God's judgment or even the extent of human sins, as those verses that we often read in the Psalms. But the writer is telling us that God is not the kind of God under those judgment and sinners wither. Rather, there is forgiveness with God. Forgiveness, in other words, is who God is. This psalm is about the very character of God, which remains steadfast even in the abyss. God is not to be feared because the wrath of God's judgment, but God is to be revered because with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is great power to redeem. God's unchanging love is the essence of who God is, and God's power is precisely the power to redeem. It is this God, the writer argues, the God who is of mercy and of love, who will redeem the people. In similar laments, we hear other places in the Psalms that the psalmist must call upon the God to remember God's mercy, but not here. Here, the writer calls us to remember that God is mercy. We need a reminder, especially in the depths of our misery. Augustine says that Jonah's prayer that was uttered in the depths of the whale's body was not contained by that body. Jonah's prayer, quote, penetrated all things. It burst through all things. It reached the ears of God. Even prayer that issues the utter abandonment of human suffering reaches God's ears, is heard and is answered by God, who is very being is love. Augustine continues that love not only hears but becomes a companion who leads us on our way. God hears the cry of the abyss, meets us in the depth of our pain, and accompanies us in and through it, sharing in our suffering and leading us toward the light of God's redemption. So basically, all of this, I'm saying that the sad truth is that human beings can be downright broken when they are in these depths. The deepest suffering not only can tear at our flesh and our hearts, but it can strip us of what makes us who we are, such that we feel that our very selves are lost and we can't recognize ourselves. To someone in this state whose stolen self is unable to issue the prayer of God's healing, what would something like Psalm 130 say? Well, I think it would say that together with the gentle companionship of others and who have known suffering and redemption, the words of Psalm 130 can be a healing balm to a shattered soul, offering assurance of God's endless mercy and the divine companionship that will remake all that is broken. Psalm 130 issues a calling to the assembled to claim for each other and for all of us that the vast mercy of God and to companion one another. We travel with one another throughout this myriad of abysses with each other and all encounters. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope that that today's text and reflection worked for you, worked for you, uh, but was meaningful to you. And I hope that you can join us either later tonight for our Advent midweek services that we're streaming live at 7 o'clock, both on YouTube and Facebook. Feel free to join us for that. Or I hope you'll be able to join us again next week. But until then, whenever that may be, take care of yourselves and each other.